shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. At the last trumpet, shall sound, and the dead shall be raised, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible. The trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised.
Whether you're on a tablet or a phone or a computer, welcome as we celebrate the life of Christopher Edward Akroyd, or as Chris, as he preferred, and we all knew him. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather, an uncle, a relative, an accountant, a teacher, and a friend. There's sadness, of course, in our hearts today because the bonds that we have built up with Chris, in some cases, for the whole of their lives. In my case, for a jolly good part of it. And whenever something intervenes and breaks that bond and that relationship, as death does, it causes pain. But love, joy, and hope triumph, in my humble opinion, over grief. So God be with us as we share our memories of this remarkable man.
Joe Figtree is now going to read to us from Psalms 23, one of Chris's favourite passages. Thank you, Joe.
Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
What a wonderful promise, Joe. And Chris looked forward to the time when he would be with Jesus Christ and be with him forever. Dr. Alan Lindsay, a good friend and colleague for many years, is going to lead us in prayer. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alex. Our Heavenly Father, how blessed we are at this sad time to be able to talk to you and call you our Father. How blessed we are to know that you are our God who loves us, and that you have demonstrated that love with the gift of your Son, who has lived among us, was tempted and tried and suffered as we do, and finally endured the agony of the cross, that all can have our sins forgiven and have the wonderful assurance of the hope of eternal life. But we need more than a crucified Saviour, but one who has through 3 days later broke the bonds of death, and because he lives, we know that we too shall live. How different it would be today, dear Father, for us to meet together in this way if Jesus had never come to this world. It is for this reason that we have come together today, not only to support Lorna and her family in their great loss of Chris, or even to celebrate his life of service and the wonderful memories and blessings that he's provided in our lives. But today we have also come to be reminded of the certainty that we share, that death is a conquered foe, and that one day soon this place where Chris was laid this morning will burst open and we shall see Chris again, but with no marks of suffering or pain, in a glorified and immortal body. Oh, dear Father, thank you for the preciousness of this hope we share today. We remembered the words that Jesus spoke to the sorrowing sisters of Jesus' friend Lazarus, who had just died. It's recorded in John 11 and verse 25. I am the resurrection and the life. He who has believed in me, even though he died, he shall live. What wonderful words. And the words of the Apostle Paul when he wrote to the church in Thessalonica about the second coming of Jesus in verse 16. For the Lord will descend one day soon, we believe, from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. How significant are the words that follow. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. And Lord, today we come to you as our Father, and I pray that these words might bring much comfort and joy to Lorna, to Jenny, to Christopher, Karen, and Dean, and to all their extended family and friends. Lord, bless all who take part in this service. And as we celebrate Chris's life today, may each of us respond with a determination to be there in that great morning to greet him when he is restored to eternal life. Thank you, Lord. Be with us now, I pray, in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsay. A beautiful prayer. Some of us have just come from the graveside where we laid Chris to rest. He awaits the trumpet call. He awaits Jesus. And to lead us in a few thoughts, Dr. Norman Young is going to share a brief homily.
You all know what a syllogism is. In case you don't, in case you were like me when I was a young man, a young tradesman in Perth, I wouldn't have known a syllogism if I tripped over it. A syllogism is a very ancient proof. It has a major premise, a minor premise, and the conclusion. Quite a favorite one, not well known because of obvious reasons as we progress. Goes right back to the Romans. All swans are white, premise number one. That bird is a swan. Therefore, it is white. And that remained true. In fact, they used to refer back in the Middle Ages to a black swan as the epitome of an example of the impossible. Then the Dutch navigator Wilhelm de Vlaming in 1697 sailed into Western Australia and discovered something that I knew from boyhood because I'd seen the black swans on Lake Macquarie, and I knew that this syllogism that had endured 2,000 years was wrong. In fact, many philosophers now quote it as an example of how you can be more sure of things than you should be. I'm going to quote now from Tim Lowe in a beautiful article called "The Black Swan, the Impossible Bird." He says that discovery of Vlaming's in 1697 showed how risky it is to declare something as impossible. The most famous syllogism is the one that goes back to the Greeks. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Well, are the major and minor premises there true? Well, yes, but not the whole truth. Not the whole truth. Why do I say that? Well, let me quote Acts 2:24 in the New Living Translation. But God released him, that is Jesus, from the horrors of death and raised him back to life, for death could not keep him in its grip. That kind of qualifies that universal statement, because when we say all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, therefore he is mortal, we mean that when he dies, that's it. But this was not so for Jesus. The premises are true, but not totally true of Jesus. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? It is swallowed up in the victory of Christ. See 1 Corinthians 15:55. Swallowed up by the victory of Christ, who abolished death and brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. There's an interesting exchange between Jesus and some Pharisees in Mark 12. The Sadducees, remember, did not believe in the resurrection. And so they are testing Jesus, and they want to set him a conundrum that they think is unanswerable. And here's how the conundrum goes. There's a law. Remember, they only accept the 5 books of Moses. There is a law, they say to Jesus, in the books of Moses that says that if a man dies, leaving his widow childless, his brother must marry her and give her offspring, give her an heir. Now, we might find that strange, but really, in some ways, it's no stranger than finding a donor sperm. But they didn't have our science back there, so the only way to do it was line up the brother to be the donor. And he had to make that donation, not in some medical way, but in the usual way. 7 of them, they said, 7 brothers. So you'd want to wonder what kind of food the wife was cooking to these brothers. But 7 of them had her as wife, and still she was childless. And they all died, and then finally she died. And then they set their trap, snapped it shut on Jesus, and asked him the question. And that is, in the resurrection, and this is verse 23 of chapter 12 of Mark, in the resurrection, and you can just see the smirk on their faces, in the resurrection, whose wife will she be? For 7 of them had her as their wives. Answer that one, you Galilean. And of course, he has to answer it from the books of Moses. They won't accept anything from Job or prophets. And Jesus then answers them from the books of Moses. He's quoting from Deuteronomy, I think. No, he's quoting from Exodus. He says, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the story about the bush, the burning bush, how God said to him, I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob. And then Jesus concludes in verse 17, he is God, not of the dead, but of the living. So remember, if you read it in context, he's talking about the dead rising in the immediately above in verse 16, I think. He's talking about the dead rising, and he has to try and prove that. So he's more in line with the Pharisees who believe the resurrection than the Sadducees who didn't. His point is, if God is the God of Abraham and the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, which is repeated throughout the Torah, then he has to be the God that can raise the dead. For he is not the God of the dead, but the living. And if they are dead, then this cannot be true that he's the God. For whatever God is, he always is. Whatever God, whatever genitive or adjective you use with God, that must be what he ever is. God doesn't make casual acquaintances. He makes friends, friends for eternity. Look at some of the titles. He is the God of mercies and the Father of comfort, 2 Corinthians 1, 2, and 3. He's the God of peace, 2 Corinthians 13, 11. He's the Father of orphans, the protector of widows, Psalm 68, 5. If these are the things he is eternally those things. Isn't that good to know when you read about a judgment, to know that the God that's in that judgment is the God of mercy and grace and goodness, because that is what he always is. He's not a chameleon. He doesn't change his character. If he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that describes his eternal relationship with them, because he is the God not of the dead, but of the living. I read just recently Eddie Jacko's book, The Happiest Man on Earth. On page 173, he used in the German a dual couplet. I will give it to you in the English. The Happiest Man on Earth, page 173. Remember, Eddie Jacko used to take school children around the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Sydney. He died last year, aged 100. He was a prisoner in Auschwitz, and he survived it because he happened to be a precision instrument toolmaker, a skill that the Nazis needed. So he was designated an irreplaceable Jew. And he had a good friend prior to being put into a concentration camp, a good friend that was in there with him in Auschwitz. And they didn't see each other very often. His good friend was in the medical, and that's why he survived. So they both survived, but traumatized, terribly traumatized. But what helped them endure at their own emotional level was their friendship, because every now and then they saw each other. And then after the war, they met up with one another in an American identity pool. And their friendship was renewed, of course. It had never stopped. And that friendship helped not only them survive Auschwitz, but to recover from it. And here's what he says in English, my translation. People die, flowers fade, iron and steel break, but our friendship, talking about his friend, our friendship never fails. Now, I've already said in Jesus' teaching in Mark 12, what God is, he always is. He eternally is. If he is your friend, then he's a friend forever, unless you break the friendship. He won't. He won't. Chris, I can tell you, on the basis of knowing him quite intimately, we walked together for about 25 years, according to Chris, and I think his sums are pretty right. He's good at figures. Chris was a friend of God. So God was a friend of his. And as I said, God doesn't make casual acquaintances. Christ will be raised again because he is, that is God. He is God not of the dead, but of the living. Mark 12:17. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Young, who's a neighbour. He can look from his house into Chris and Lorna's place. You must have walked hundreds of kilometres in that time with Dean and with Chris. Thank you. Thank you for that homily. We are now going to listen to a life sketch that will be read by Dr. Kevin Petrie, who is the Vice-Chancellor of Avondale University and a very close relative. Thank you, Dr. Kevin.
Thank you, Alex. Chris was born in Gisborne, New Zealand on January 12, 1940. His father, William Whiteman, died suddenly when Chris was 4 years old. A few years later, his mother married Aubrey Akroyd, at which time Chris acquired two sisters, Lynn and Prue. Chris left school at 15 and inverted commas over his mother's dead body and got to work in an office. He bought a red MG convertible, but a year later he rethought this decision as those with more education were getting promoted ahead of him. With the encouragement of his good friend Alex Curry, he attended Longbourn College, graduating in 1958. It was at Longbourn that he first met Lorna Petrie, who would later become his wife. After graduating from Longbourn College in 1958, Chris worked as Adventist Book Centre manager in Christchurch. While living in Christchurch, Chris attended Canterbury University and obtained his professional accounting qualifications. On December 31, 1963, Chris married Lorna Petrie, and the following year, they moved to Auckland, where Chris managed the Adventist Book Centre. While in Auckland, 3 children joined the family, Jenny in 1964, Chris Jr. in 1966, and Kieran in 1968. In 1968, Chris, Lorna, and the 3 children moved to Melbourne, again as manager of the Adventist Book Centre. In 1969, Chris was asked to become treasurer of the Pakistan Union, and on the first day of 1970, the family flew to Pakistan. The children were aged 5, 4, and 15 months. After living in Lahore for 3 years, Chris was transferred to Karachi to become business manager of the Karachi Adventist Hospital, where he served from 1973 to 1977. Fortunately, the hospital had a large expatriate staff and a primary school was operated, so the children were able to attend school in Karachi. During the almost 8 years in Pakistan, the family survived the 1971 war with India and a military coup that overthrew the government of President Bhutto. A 4th child, Dean, was born in 1975. In 1977, the family left on furlough to attend Andrews University, where in his 2nd semester, Chris was asked to teach an accounting subject. Out of this developed a love for the classroom, which culminated in Chris joining the staff in the business faculty at Avondale in 1981. Before moving back to Australia, however, Chris completed a Masters of Accounting from Andrews University and a Masters of Finance from the University of Wisconsin. Chris influenced the lives of many of his students with his encouragement, faith in their ability. He would also tour around schools, raising awareness of the business degree at Avondale and the advantages of attending a smaller institution. Many of his students still remember him fondly. Chris retired in 2005 and spent his retirement going for long morning walks with Norm Young and helping any that needed help with financial advice or completing their tax returns. He greatly loved attending E14 Sabbath School and always looked forward to the deep discussions held there. At the end of 2019, Chris was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he spent the last 6 months being well looked after at Avondale House. He passed away peacefully in his sleep on January 23, not long after his 82nd birthday.
Thank you, Dr. Petrie. What a life. And he packed so much into that life. Well, the oldest daughter, Dr. Jenny Mowbray, is going to share some cameos from their life as a family. Thank you, Jenny.
My first memories of my dad are doing puzzles together. I was probably 4 years old. I can still remember the puzzle today. It was round and would hunt down the edge pieces and then slowly make the animals and slowly piece it together. And I still love doing puzzles. My other big memory of my father is him reading to me every night. He would read me Uncle Arthur's bedtime stories. And as a manager of many Adventist book centres, we never lacked for books. Our favourite shops to go to would be bookshops where we would all browse happily, and Dad would always buy me any book I wanted. In Pakistan, we had a really fun childhood. We used to go for Sabbath afternoon drives and get lost. We would see what we could find, and as children, we would sit in the back and go, will we ever get home? What if Dad can't find his way home in the days before GPSs or even the maps in the car? We'd see oxen grinding wheat just like Bible times, and small villages with the huts covered with buffalo dung. And really, it was, I guess, almost like Bible times in the villages in Pakistan. We had holidays in Kashmir, riding bad-tempered horses in the foothills of the Himalayas, where we saw our first snow, this dirty patch behind a rock that hadn't melted. We also got in trouble from the locals for fishing in the river as children. We had a stick and some string, and you needed a license to fish. And my mother got told off when she laughed at them. We had a holiday to Africa to visit Uncle Ivor and Auntie Margaret and our cousins, and went traveling around with them and saw the Victoria Falls. And then we traveled through England and Europe on our way to America in a camper van and had a lovely time exploring. And our last trip was a trip through New Zealand on our way back to Australia in 1980. We all still love to travel. Dad's faith in God lived out in his life in very practical ways. He was always willing to do anything for anyone. And I'm sure, as people who saw us in Pakistan would know, he would get through airport security, which in the 70s wasn't very difficult, to meet traveling dignitaries at their gates, getting off the plane, and get them through customs with a minimum of fuss. And Dad also showed us what God was like in his faith in each of us. Just like God gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist, Dad saw in us kids potentials and possibilities that he brought to life by his belief in us. If it hadn't been for his faith in me, I would never have become a doctor. And I know he did the same for many of his students over the years. In some ways, our childhood was very ordinary. We read books and made things. We traveled and explored. But everything was infused with a sense of wonder and adventure and love. We will miss Dad greatly, but we have the blessed hope of the resurrection and a mind and body made new and vigorous.
Thank you, Jenny. Lovely memories, lovely memories. We live in a day and age of lockdowns. In New Zealand, where Dr. Chris Akroyd Jr. is living, he can't get out of the country and we can't get in. But Chris, what a wonderful thing Zoom is. And as a son, share with us some of your wonderful memories. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm actually coming to you from Canterbury University. So I moved back to New Zealand in April last year and got a job at Canterbury where Dad actually did his accounting studies. So it's been really nice to go back and see the places where Dad used to study when he was here and the things he did used to do. I could probably get into Australia at the moment. My trouble is I could not get back to New Zealand. That would be the biggest issue. Unfortunately, that is quite difficult. Although my son was very lucky enough to get an MIQ place and has just come back from Japan. So hopefully they're listening in. But first, I want to thank everybody for coming to celebrate Dad's life. He was an amazing person. Yeah, my first memories of Dad are out playing in the yard. I remember we had a swing set in Lahore and we used to love the swings. And I think Dad played out on the swings with us every single day that I can remember there. When we moved to Karachi, I was a little bit older and he would take me to the squash center with him. So he loved to play squash, especially against Alan Loughlin. That was his favorite squash partner. And he would take me and I would watch their epic battles, but also get to play squash with some of the kids there who would come along. And then Dad, after the games, would play with me. I'd go watch him play cricket. Whatever he was doing, he would always take me along. And those kind of experiences, you know, just being able to be with your dad in those kind of situations really meant a lot to me. When we moved to the US, of course, there was pretty much no cricket and no squash. So we had to find something else to do. And it didn't take us long to find tennis. So we really got into playing tennis at Andrews University. Dad would go out and play tennis with me all the time. Got me a coach. I wouldn't say I got very good, but it was a lot of fun. A really enjoyable thing to do. When we moved to Wisconsin, of course, the thing you have to do if you live in Wisconsin is go to see a Green Bay Packers game. And of course, Dad took me to a Green Bay Packers game at Lambeau Field. And that's always going to stick in my memory, just being there with him and talking about it and being in this special place. You know, don't ask me how we got tickets. Those games are always sold out. And somehow we always found tickets, just like when we visited David Babcock. Remember when we went to visit David in Maryland once? He got us games to see the Baltimore Orioles play the New York Yankees. We heard it was a sellout, and Dad said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll find a way." Goes up to the ticket office, and he figures out a way to get us tickets. Yes, sitting right at the very back of the bleachers, but oh, it was just so much fun hanging out with Dad and doing things with him. The other thing in Australia that we loved to do, of course, was go to the Sydney Cricket Ground. Yeah, he thought that was our cultural education. Dad had lots of different ideas about education, and they didn't all involve a classroom. Cricket was cultural education, and he would take us and our friends out of school to take us to the cricket because he thought that's what we needed to do to really learn about Australia. And back in those days, the Sydney Cricket Ground had the hill. So we would sit with our blankets spread out on the grass, chatting with Dad and watching cricket. And with lots of, with my sisters, they would come, our friends would come. It would just be a really fun family event that we would always do every year, go to the cricket at the SCG. Those kind of things are just really special that you always keep in your mind. And when you're thinking about Dad, you're thinking of all the times and the place and the things that you did with him. Dad taught us to, as Jenny said, Dad taught us to enjoy the small things in life and to never get too carried away with success or failure. And for those of you who know me from my Avondale college or high school days, you know I failed a lot. I actually failed my dad's accounting class. Yes, as many people know, I failed my own father's. And did he get mad? No, not at all. He said, you know what, classroom education probably isn't for you at the moment, so let's think of something else. So he went searching for a job for me and found an office job at a sanitarium health food company in Sydney as a clerk. And you know what? That changed my life. The things that I learned there working and the people I was with really taught me a lot about what accounting really is. And so that when I eventually did go back and study accounting, I could actually visualize what was happening because my brain doesn't work the same way. I couldn't just see numbers and think, oh, I know what that is. But seeing it in practice, I could transfer it into what a textbook had. And this probably comes back to, I was very different from my older sister. I don't think I really read a book till I was in my 20s. And so I didn't have any of that book learning to kind of fall back on. I was the outdoor sports person, always going out and doing stuff outdoors. And that's what's so amazing about Dad. He could do all the different things that we were all interested in. It wasn't just that he could do one thing. He was interested in the books and the outside and all the different things that us kids were interested in. Dad would get involved in. And so that time at Sanitarium Health Food Company kind of taught me what I wanted to do. It got me a passion in life. Went back to university, did a bachelor's, 2 masters, and a PhD. And now I teach accounting at Canterbury University. Absolutely loving it. But it's those little things that matter. Keeping a positive attitude, not worrying about whether you're successful or whether you're failing. Just always look at the small things that you should be enjoying every day, the things around you, the things that we need to be thankful for. Those are the things that I really look back on Dad, that he taught us how to really value those small things in life. And that was gonna make you happy. So I'm really looking forward to hearing everybody else's stories and memories about Dad, because even though I'm far away and didn't get to see him for the last couple of years because of all the travel restrictions, I still have all the great memories of Dad, and nobody can ever take those away from me. Thank you.
Hey, that's wonderful, Chris. Thank you so much. Your father saw Canterbury University before he actually went there as a student. We were hitchhiking in the South Island for 5 weeks, and we arrived in Christchurch after dark, and we didn't have a place. We had to pitch a tent, and we found a lawn at Canterbury University and pitched it there and got up early in the morning. So that was our introduction to Canterbury University. Thank you so much. That was passionate, interesting, insightful. And Karen Mowbray, another child of Chris and Lorna, she's put together a visual presentation. Some of the pictures, a picture will tell 1,000 words, and you make up your own story as we see these pictures. Thank you. those pictures certainly brought some memories. Reminded me of so many of the people I've met over the years. And now I'm wondering, is Angel there, ready to play a ukulele and sing a song? We heard her at the graveside, and it was just beautiful. Thank you, Angel. And tell us about that ukulele. It's a bit bigger than...
Oh, it's a baritone ukulele. It's
Oh.
The strings are the same like tune of the last 4 strings of a guitar, so it's different.
Oh, that's good. You'll
My singing voice doesn't.
You'll have to play it and sing with Dr. Kevin Petrie one day. Okay.
No, he'd be way better than me. Just telling you that.
Okay, thank you.
Go to the top of this time. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my love thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. My sin, oh the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin not in part, but a whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. When the Lord hates the day, the fair shall be sight. The clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall be said. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul.
Thank you, Angel. That was beautiful. Your grandfather was, very proud of you. And I can see that down the track, you're headed for Avondale Conservatorium to learn a bit more music. Yeah, that's wonderful, wonderful. We go now to some of the family. And Sister Lynn is in New Zealand, a trained nurse from Sydney Adventist Hospital, whose daughter and her daughter were at the graveside service this morning. Thank you so much, Lynn.
It's just such a privilege to look at all the faces on the screen and how many folk I know and how you all will miss Chris. He, probably some of you don't know, was only a month and a day younger than me. In other words, we were brother and sister, not blood brother and sister. Chris became an Akroyd when my mum married my dad. And it's just wonderful to have a wonderful family. I see the Rundles here. My mother was my adoptive mother, will I say it that way, was a Rundle. And it is just so wonderful to see you all. And I thank you for your tributes to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. That was lovely. Arthur Petrie is a brother to Lorna. Thank you, Arthur, if you're there.
I guess the main problem that we had as a family was keeping track of each other. I can remember in the early days, we were all in Melbourne. Ivor and Margaret were in Warburton. Chris and Lorna were at the conference office at the ABC, and I was at the Melbourne retail branch in Hawthorne. From there on, we scattered. Ivor and Margaret moved to Africa. Chris and Lorna moved to Pakistan. And I think we might have moved from there from Melbourne to Adelaide. And we spent our lives trying to keep track of each other as the years rolled on. I can remember one occasion while we were in Adelaide when I think Chris and Lorna were probably returning from Pakistan, and we were all together. It was a wonderful time, just a short time, but it was quite a job keeping track of each other as we went along. We did spend some time in Fiji, and we did have a visit from Lorna and Chris there, as well as my parents. And so we were together again. But in the last few years, as we've retired, we've been together for quite some time, almost 20 years. And that must be a record for us as a family. I miss my only brother-in-law, and I know that his legacy will live on. His family will be displayed in all the virtues that Chris is known for. And I know that as a family, we all look forward to the day when we see each other again. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur. Graham Rundle from New Zealand. You must be Bill's son, are you, Graham? I'm not sure. I know the Rundle name, originally from the west coast of the South Island. You there, Graham?
Yes.
I'm going to share for.
Thank you. You're on.
I'm going to share for Graham Rundle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, go ahead.
Memories from cousin Chris. These are memories from Graham Rundle, Chris's cousin. Living and growing up in Gisborne, beaches were an important part of my life. Catching waves and body surfing were a large component of our life. As a youngster, when I was about 8, Chris was about 22 or 23. I remember well him arriving, and then off to the beach we would go and have a great time. I always loved talking to Chris, and as I matured, I took on board much of his vast knowledge of many topics. In later years, when new to owning and running our own business, Chris's business and accounting skills, which he freely passed on, were so appreciated. In all my male cousins, Chris was my favourite, and it saddened me to realise that after our last phone call that he was not well. Although both of us lived in different parts of the world, we were often in the same country. Chris and Lorna and family were never far from our thoughts. Di, too, remembers fondly the fun get-togethers with your family whenever possible over the years, in both Australia and New Zealand, and our catch-ups were filled with laughter and stories. Great times shared with positive and enthusiastic and loving people. Chris and Lorna and family are well thought of and loved. See you on that great resurrection day, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I think there must be a musical gene that runs in the family, because I know Stephen. He was a member of my church in Thornley as a very good pianist. Thank you, Stephen, for your sharing.
I better correct that, Alex. That's my brother David.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's so easy to get names mixed up. My apologies.
That's all right.
Are you the cricketer?
I got given the choice between playing the piano and playing sport, so I took sport. So.
I've seen you play cricket.
Yeah. All right. My Uncle Chris was special for so many reasons, and today I just want to share a few personal ones for me. And I think, as has come out in these reflections so far. My fond memories start in the teenage years when they finally came back to Australia, and those years revolve, I guess, a lot around long hot summers with the family at Kurrambong. Lots of watching American football that my boys actually still do as well. Lots of playing cricket in the backyard with Dean. And of course, as Chris has said already, many trips to the Sydney Cricket Ground in the old Ford station wagon that I think back in the 80s, it was quite a trip down to the SCG. It was not quite so easy as it is today. But it was during my college life that Uncle Chris had the biggest influence on my life. Not only was he my favourite lecturer in the business department, but obviously he was a big influence, especially during that last year at college when I actually lived with them in Kurrambong. I just remember that he had an amazing sense of humour. Oftentimes we'd sit down before the 7 o'clock news and we'd watch old reruns of Yes Prime Minister and Fawlty Towers and laugh away. Uncle Chris also had a wonderful love of classical music, and I often would sit with him in the front room there and listen to his classical CDs. And then, of course, sometimes when I was the only one in the house, I'd put some on for myself as well too. So it gave me kind of a great appreciation of that genre of music. He also gave me a great appreciation of rugby union. So as a child that grew up in Melbourne, I actually had no concept of what rugby was until I came to Kurrambong. And I remember later on in the not too distant past that we would sit and watch the All Blacks play the Wallabies together. Some of the other things I remember is he would always be the one cleaning up after dinner in the kitchen. And I think that's something that I've incorporated into my life as well too. And I also remember him constantly reminding me that I should just choose one glass and I should put it somewhere where I will remember it. So I didn't make the washing up at the end of the day so big. And of course, it's also the home where I met my future wife as well too. And in the last few years before COVID changed everything, I always made time to visit whenever work brought me across to Newcastle. And on the last occasion I was over in February 2020, as I left 19 Jacaranda Close, I wondered if that would be the last time I saw him. And as it turns out, it was. They were always happy times that I remember there, and they will always be remembered as that. And Uncle Chris is at rest now, but I am comforted in the fact that sometime very soon we will all be together again. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Lovely testimony. My experience goes back to when I was late 14, early 15. And an old grey-haired lady walked into Hamilton Church, New Zealand, with 3 children. Teenage children, a boy and 2 girls. It was Chris and Prue and Lynn. I walked up to Chris afterwards and introduced myself and told him I'd introduce him to some of our young people in the church. He said, "Oh, I'm a Church of England." And I said, "No, that's okay. All is well." And from that point on, we became strong friends, good friends. I remember when Chris got his license. He also got his first car. It was a convertible MG, a red MG. And my, did we drive some miles in that MG. But both of us were built for service. And it was interesting. There were a lot of small churches in the Waikato. And we decided we would have a ministry. We would hire a movie projector, get films and take them to Cambridge to run a Saturday night film show, and to Te Aroa, and other places to run films on a Saturday night, particularly for the young people. That was service. Yeah. It was Chris's mother who encouraged me to sing in the local choir, to sing the Messiah. And we sang in various towns around the Waikato. Lots of memories, too many. But I'm finishing high school. And I said to Chris, I'm going to go to Longburn College next year, and I'm going to commence studying for ministry. He said, "Oh, do they train accountants down there?" I said, "Look, I don't know, but I'm going to go down. why don't you come with me? So we went. The long story is that he talked to the principal on Sunday morning in his garden and said, look, you've got an accounting program here. I'll come if I can room with Alex. We roomed. And one of the things we decided when we go was that we needed an infrared cooker so we could cook some eggs and other niceties. And we took that to our room, but we soon discovered that the smell of cooking things flooded through the dormitory. So we found a good friend by the name of Ivor Petrie, who was working for the Sanitarium Health Food Company as an assistant accountant just across the way at the factory. He had a room in boys' dormitory downstairs and was certainly not a student. We asked him, would he care for this infrared cooker? And sure enough, he did. I think it helps us to solidify the relationships with the Petries, between the Akroyds and Petries. Well, that was interesting. Chris and I learned so much at Longbourn. We met so many friends there. And that was the commencement of a strong relationship with the church, a desire to serve, and both of us have served all of our lives. And now we're going to go to South New Zealand, to Bev and Ray Fall, who met Chris in South New Zealand. Thank you.
My education began in Christchurch for the first couple of years during the war. And then later, my education was at Avondale College, and I was appointed after my graduation to go to Christchurch again. I was given tickets to sail to Littleton, leaving Friday the 13th of January 1961. No one to meet me there at the wharf. So I phoned around, and finally I found someone at the conference, 2 suitcases, and I was transported to the camp. The camp was about to start, so they gave me work there. Chris was asked then to look after me. Chris asked the family he was boarding with if I could share his tiny little bedroom in a family with 4 kids. He was my local guide to church, to the barber, to buy ice skates, to go to lakes that are frozen in the winter and join in youth activities. Next year, Chris found more suitable accommodation, cycling everywhere, family hospitality. Chris went to uni and encouraged me to do the same. So after school, I went to find subjects that would be helpful. Study, it was very noisy one night. Saturday night, we were trying to study. And so I said to Chris, let's go out. And we went to the porch of the other flat that was upstairs. I had 6pence in my pocket, so we took the lamp out, put 6pence on the top and put it back in again. Upstairs, immediately blacked out. Chris really enjoyed that. Chris took me on a tram, a trip to Hamilton, and that's where we saw his mother and borrowed his mother's car. We went all the way up to Cape Ringer and back, because he loved car trips. Many years and many letters and photos kept in touch. And finally, we were only a little apart, and Chris invited us to join the Laura Head picnics. Great aging together friendship.
Christchurch. What a privilege growing up through late 50s and early 60s. Re-energised community, a growing economy, jobs in the work, in our churches, Adventist schools, sanitarium, factory and head office there, South New Zealand Conference, Book and Bible House. Fine young men and women fresh out of college joined staff on the move. Local city and country youth formed a united front under the legendary Lou Lansdowne's leadership. Whether it was working bees, building new central youth hall, establishing youth and pathfinder camps in the Alpine foothills, very rustic living, tents that you'd let down on top of each other, recreational sports, train trips to the snow at Arthur's Pass, or bus coach trips, ice skating on the frozen lakes. 2 years in Alan Lindsay's 100-voice choir for the Cook program, mystery destination socials, holding hands in the Grand March. Fun and wholesome early teen, young adult friendships were formed. One such, assistant book and Bible house manager, part-time accountancy university student Chris Akroyd. 1960s Youth Congress in the North Island was a highlight. Chris invited me to meet his family in both Hamilton and Gisborne. Maternal grandmother, Nan Rundle, was Chris's spiritual nurturer and guiding light. We all loved inspirational letter writing Nan. And I remember meeting up with Uncle Phil and Uncle Bill's cousins in Gisborne, and also Prue and Lynn. And that was just lovely. Chris was always so warm and so wonderful, even with the family history. There was such a broad depth to his interest, enjoying the music that his mum enjoyed and all. The ultimate rescuer, Chris, handed me over to Ray for better or worse. Our dear friend, Lorna, got to say yes to rescue Chris the dead. Thank you, Chris, for the legacy you were entrusted with and now are leaving for us. Commitment to work, study, good citizenship, loyalty and fun-loving family respect, lasting friendships, justice for all, confident in your God and in your calling, a legacy of a lived faith. God's peace to you, Lorna, and your beautiful family, until we hear that trumpet sound.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you to both of you. That was wonderful. To me, Nana Runda was like a saint. She really was a beautiful Christian person. Now, from South New Zealand, we went to North New Zealand, and Bev and I stayed with the Akroyd family there. In some of those photographs, did you see the matching dresses and uniforms that they had? Well, that was the work of Lorna's mum and Lorna herself. Lorna's always been very handy with needlecraft and sewing, etc. And from Auckland, they went to Melbourne. On the wall of Chris in his office were his degrees from Canterbury University. And on one occasion, B.B. Beach from the General Conference in the United States was in Chris's office, spotted it, and said, "You need to be a missionary." And thus it was off to Pakistan. And so we're headed to Pakistan now. And Brenda Parkinson, if you're with us, could you share with us some insights from Pakistan? Thank you.
Hello, Alex. Can you hear me? I'm going to be reading Brenda's.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah. So Brenda writes, 48 years ago, I met Chris and Lorna and family when we arrived very green in Karachi. They helped to ease us into life in a different culture. The memories of Chris are of a man able to deal with the ups and downs of life, professional and social and personal, meeting difficulties with a good sense of humour, if wry at times. It is impossible to separate the memories of Chris from my memories of Lorna. They were a strong combination, focused on their family, but involved and helpful to those around them. After they left Pakistan, we kept in touch, and the annual photo shows their growing family of whom they were justifiably proud. I am glad we knew him. His family will miss him, but will perpetuate his legacy.
Thank you. Thank you for that testimony. When Chris and I were young, there was a slogan that went around and was put up on posters around New Zealand: join the Navy and see the world. Well, Chris and I joined the workforce of the Adventist Church, and we have seen the world. We heard earlier how the family had travelled not only to Pakistan, but through Europe and America, etc. And we had the same kind of experience. When we belong to Jesus, we embrace the nations of the world. Eva Ring was another missionary in Pakistan. Now, I've known Eva for a few years, but I had no idea that she worked with my friend Chris in Pakistan. Thank you, Eva, if you're there.
Hi, Alex. I do have to correct you. I was actually a childhood friend of Jenny, Chris, and Karen, and I was born in Pakistan. That's where I met them. So we went to school together in Karachi, and I can still remember in the early 70s when the Akroyds arrived, and they were to live upstairs within the school compound. Now, this is a really important fact. They lived upstairs in the school compound because this is where I was introduced to the sin of envy, because Mrs. Akroyd used to always bring hot lunches every day with the little Tupperware containers with all the little segments, and they were all in pastel colors. And I was just so envious. I think every kid in school was envious because their mom brought them lunch every day. So Mr. Akroyd was a business administrator who was in charge of the non-medical side of the hospital. And I can still remember once when my dad and I had to visit Mr. Akroyd in his office to talk about my school tuition fees and how generous he was in enabling my sister and I to attend the Adventist school, which was established to educate missionary kids. You know, my parents weren't missionaries. They weren't even Adventists, yet we were accepted into the school. And as a result, my childhood was an incredibly happy one. And the Akroyds were a great family, always happy, positive, cheerful, always laughing. And I knew that they would have had their challenges, but their positivity and faith in God always pulled them through. Mr. Akroyd was always smiling and always loved to laugh, always joking. And I learned later that those were dad jokes. This is before dad jokes, but he was Mr. Dad Joke. He had full of those jokes. And he used to go to work, and and I still remember seeing him after work or wherever, because we were at school. And I'd see him from time to time, and he would wear these shorts with long socks and collared shirts and ties. And I think it brought a new fashion sense to the business world in Karachi, because I don't think they were used to that sort of attire, but that's what he used to wear. When I look back and see how God has led, I have no doubt that the Akroyds made a huge impact on my life and made a profound impact that would have eternal consequences when he ensured that my sister and I could have an Adventist education. I'd like to say rest in peace, Mr. Akroyd. We will see you in the morning.
What a lovely testimony, Eva. I had no idea of that kind of background. Eva and I worked together in Greater Sydney. She became the treasurer for the conference and now works with the South Pacific Division. What a great story, though. Wonderful. The influence of a person. My, oh my. Chris believed that the gospel is only good news if it gets there in time. And thus he went to Pakistan to play his role there. The name Babcock was often used when we communicated together. And we have a message from George Babcock as read by Karen Mowbray.
Yes, welcome to all the Babcocks who I see have joined us. They like our family. And I'll read the letter from Fern and George. Dearest Lorna and family, I am sincerely sorry that I cannot be with you for the service of honouring my dear friend Chris. Unfortunately, my health and my age and the worldwide pandemic prevent us from being with you, but thanks to technology, we hope to watch the proceedings online. Chris and I worked together in Pakistan when he was the CFO of Karachi Adventist Hospital, while I was president of the seminary and college near Lahore. We once planned a vacation in the hills of India with 3 missionary families. the Akroyds, the Puccellis, and the Babcocks. We met in India, planning to travel south together. Unfortunately, the Pak-Indian War broke out the day after we arrived in Delhi, and our three families were stranded in very close quarters at the mission for several weeks. We had more time together than we'd planned, then as the three women took over the cooking, and we men struggled to keep all the kids happy during lockdown. We never did get our planned vacation. A few years later, Pakistan broke out in riots. Just as the unrest was starting, our family and our cook, along with a Pakistani worker and his small daughter, embarked on a 20-hour trip from Lahore to Karachi. In the middle of the night, the train was derailed by terrorists. Our carriage tipped over, others crashed, and many passengers died. By moonlight, we struggled to push members of our party and our luggage through windows that were over our heads. Then we spent hours on the desert sands waiting for rescue. Finally, another train came up from Karachi to collect all the travellers, including the injured and the bodies. When we at last reached Karachi, Chris found his way through the shouting crowds and helped us back to his van, bedraggled and filthy, and took us to his home. We will never forget how glad we were to see Chris and the fantastic hospitality of the Akroyd family during the next few weeks. When Fern had to fly home for health reasons and George needed to travel to Bangladesh, we left Sherry and David with the Akroyds in Karachi, where they enjoyed being with their playmates and were well taken care of. Sherry noted that Chris really liked peanut butter, tomato, and onion sandwiches. She couldn't imagine why he would like such a horrid sandwich until she tried one. She's liked them ever since. David remembers Chris taking them swimming in the ocean and to the squash courts in Karachi. We appreciated knowing our kids were safe at the Akroyds in our own home. At the end of our service in Pakistan, we flew to Karachi to catch a plane to the United States. We were headed for Andrews University, where I could get my doctorate degree. Chris came and picked us up at the airport and warned us that because there was rioting and looting in Karachi, the city was under a curfew to prevent more trouble. Chris, however, had a special pass as a Karachi hospital administrator, so he could travel through the city. Again, he took us to his home. The next day, our family needed to go to the hospital for final health checks before we flew to America. Chris drove us there, but on the way, we ran into a rioting crowd who were throwing bricks and rocks at our car. With a maddening mob ahead of us, Chris yelled, "Hang on, we're going through." We pushed the kids to the floor, hunkered down ourselves and prayed. Chris drove like a madman and emerged safely without having a great deal of damage to his car and to none of us. We believe that God helped him through the rioters without killing any of them. Chris was our hero that day. 2 days later, he again used his curfew pass to get us to the airport. Stopping at checkpoints along the way, we couldn't have made it without him. While we were at Andrews, the Akroyds joined us, and both Chris and George attended classes while the women cared for home and children. Our two boys got lost in a Michigan blizzard together and caused a lot of alarm until they found their way to the university apartments. When Chris and Lorna had to make a quick trip to Australia because of a family crisis, we kept Jenny, Chris Jr., Karen, and Dean. Those were happy days. When graduation time came, Chris finished his master's degree and I finished my doctorate. After that, the Akroyds returned to Australia, while the Babcocks were called to the General Conference in Silver Springs, Maryland. The distance and our work kept us from seeing each other except for one short visit when I chaired the accreditation team at Avondale. Years later, Fern and her sister came to Australia for a short visit and had a wonderful opportunity to stay with Chris and Lorna and Dean. Chris told us Dean was working in food services at a nearby facility, and he and Lorna were both very proud of his accomplishments. Fern mentioned that Chris and Dean went walking together a lot, and Chris was certainly a good dad. His faithful service both to the Lord and to his family would be greatly missed. And even though we have been separated for several years, the friendship we have will last throughout eternity. We love all of you, and we look forward to a time when Jesus comes and we can all be united again. What a joy that will be. Lovingly, George and Fern Babcock.
Thank you. Norm Young, you have some things about your friendship also, besides the homily that you shared earlier. If you're there, Norm.
Yeah, I'm here. We were colleagues, of course, on Avondale campus, but I didn't get to know him all that well there because I was in theology, he was in business. But later, he and Lorna built a house just over the road from us and a Masterton home, I recall. And he had this turf, rolled up turf, arrived after the house was built and after they'd moved in to roll out, to put a lawn down instead of the dry clay that this area has. And I went over and said, "Do you need a hand?" And Chris, not being all that practical, yes, was very anxious for a hand. So I helped him roll out these rolls of turf. He seemed to be incredibly grateful for doing such a small gesture. But that's when the friendship sort of started. I think he was impressed that somebody who taught theology didn't mind actually getting dirt on his hands. But then, of course, I started life as a tradesman. I can't remember, according to you, Kevin, he retired in 2005. I'm not sure which retirement that was because he retired twice. He retired first from college and then took up work with Arbitrage Partners and ran the Avondale Foundation. And then he finally retired from that. We started walking on Sabbath afternoons. And Chris was an incredible walker, fast and endured as well. I was a dawdler and gave up as soon as I started to hurt, but not Chris. And he kept extending the walks every Sabbath afternoon, or unless I was away preaching or something. And we walked up Avondale Road and onto the gravel. And our first stopping place, I remember, was the first driveway, and we'd turn around. And then there's what I called the twin trees. Chris was always in need of a tree, but he won't go into that. And we'd turn around there. And then we went up to the next driveway beyond that. And he discovered that that next driveway was 150 meters, I think, short of an even number. He had an accountant's tidy mind. And I said, well, so what? Who cares what the distance is? Well, he did. So from then on, we had to walk to this tree. And, they all looked the same. I could never tell, is this the tree or this one? And if he wasn't walking with me, I had no idea where to actually stop for the even number. Then we went right up to another driveway, which were apparently relatives of his, a big estate. And then beyond that, and mercifully, and the next beyond that was up a very steep incline and ended at a gate. There was no going past that gate. And so I'm very grateful for that gate because he had this theory that you went up the hill at the same pace you walked on the flat. He didn't do that for downhill. He speeded up for that. So I thought he was inconsistent. But we would both a bit competitive and we would race up that hill. How we never had a heart attack, I don't know. Trying to beat each other up, walking up this hill. We sometimes changed direction after a while. we walked for about an hour and a quarter every morning, hardly ever missed. We started walking down through the college, right down to the swing bridge, and then back around, and then through Kennedy Close, and up the Prescott Hill. That was the final killer, the Prescott Hill, which we used to race up that too, like utter madmen. My wife was always inquisitive about what we talked about for an hour and a quarter every day, every morning. And then we did a 20-minute one in the afternoons in our prime. And I said, we talk about everything. We talk about things that we both watched on TV. In fact, he insisted on telling me all about, he loved a program called Who Do You Think You Are? And I'd get this family tree of some celebrity, which I wasn't the slightest bit interested in. And I kept telling him I didn't even care about my own family tree. So I wasn't interested in somebody else's. But no, I did not have the choice. Listen, I had to. But the thing that amazed me was he could remember down to the last twig of that program he had watched, who was who and who was related. And I got totally lost who was who and who was in. And of course, I didn't really care. So that was one thing we talked about. We talked about the church and theology. He was like the Sadducees. He had a few questions he liked to set as conundrums. One of his favorites was, where is God? And I said, well, what do you want, a GPS reading? And I said, well, God is not restricted by time or space. So there's a sense in which he's everywhere, always. He didn't like that answer. It wasn't an accountant's answer. It had to be, you know, what is it? Something on the left and something on the right. Credits and debits. So I thought, well, let me straighten it out then. I said, God's in heaven. Ah, and where is heaven? Well, I said, where God is. And where's God? In heaven. And I think he finally got the point that he was asking an unanswerable question, but he is everywhere and he is all time. And hopefully he caught on to that as well. We sorted out most of the problems of the church and most of the problems of the world except one. We had no idea how Israel and Palestine, or the Palestinians, could live together. We battled hard for them, but in the end, we just said this war will go on and on forever. He might now, if he were to come back and we went for a walk up to the end of Alton Road or to the Swing Bridge, I think he might want to re-talk about solving all the church's problems, because we seem to have created a new batch since I walked with him last. But he would have an answer to them, and usually wise ones, wise ones. He was a very wise man, a good counselor and a great friend, and I will miss him greatly.
Yeah, thank you, Norm, for sharing. The poet, Richard Fyfe, has these lines. He says, those who live no more still echo within our thoughts and words, and what they did has become woven into what we are. We are very much part of the people that we've worked with, lived with, associated with, the people who have taught us, the people who have been our doctors. A good and happy and contented life is very much dependent on the strength of our relationships with family, friends, neighbours, colleagues, and even strangers. We have a message written by Dr. Gil Valentine from La Sierra, who was an administrator at Avondale when Chris was here. And it's going to be read by Errol and Jean McDonald. Thank you.
It starts. I first encountered Chris Akroyd when I was a very shy student colporteur in Christchurch in the summer of 1964. Chris worked in Treasury along with my sister Faye, both under Doug Elliott's direction. Chris helped keep my ledgers straight and ensured that I was amply stocked with supplies of Uncle Arthur's bedtime and Bible stories and health magazines. His cheerful enthusiasm did much to encourage both Ian Pate and me as newbies in the profession of summer book salesman.
15 years later, our paths converged again, this time in Berrien Springs in late 1978. Chris and Lorna were finishing at Andrews, and Gail and I were just starting. Chris sold us his huge, gas-guzzling, metallic blue, aging Oldsmobile station wagon with a recommendation that it was a sound investment. He assured us that he couldn't sell us a lemon. He was right. It lasted us the whole 4 years and took us all over New England.
Then in 1985, when we were at Castle Hill in Sydney, and Gail was exceedingly querulous about the wisdom of us accepting calls as missionaries to Pakistan, it was Chris who enthusiastically encouraged us to step out in faith on an adventure. He had been there, had not only survived, but had been blessed by the opportunity of service. It was Chris's persuasion, along with Lorna's quiet assurance, that helped Gail step over the line. And we both were deeply, deeply grateful for the confidence he expressed in us and for his encouragement. Chris became a mentor for both of us.
At Avondale in the 1990s, when I was vice president, Chris, as chair of the business department, was committed to building a department that maintained academic rigour and CPA recognition. He had strong opinions for sure. That was Chris. But he was a visionary and a tireless, enthusiastic promoter of a business program that would meet the needs of the church. He was also a believer in the value of seeking accreditation for and modernising the office admin program that Gail gave herself to. She greatly enjoyed working alongside him on this project and valued his insight and enthusiasm.
In the years since then, Kendra and I have treasured Chris's continued friendship and have particularly valued his thoughtful scheduling of those delightful Sabbath picnic potlucks at Nora Head whenever we were in town. Chris was one of a kind, thoughtful, progressive, and kind. We will sadly miss him. Our sincere condolences to Lorna and the family.
Thanks, Errol and Jean, for sharing Gil's very interesting and thoughtful presentation. On the chat line, I noticed there's a message from David Babcock. And David, if you're there, I'll take your 2.5 cents worth now. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, Akroyd family. Indeed a pleasure. And our condolences and sympathies at this time. We will be forever grateful to both your dad and mom for many things, primarily the 4 of you kids who are our buddies and pals growing up. And to this day, even though we're separated from time and space, I have had the chance to run into Chris a few times, Lauren, as we all know, growing up. And whether it's been a year or 5 years or 10 years, it's like it was yesterday. And just like when you read the apostles, each one gives you a better picture of Christ. This time together gives a better picture of your dad. And it so happens that in the comments from my folks and actually Chris's reference, I thought it was important to add one additional element to something that they referenced there. And there were 2 things in particular that I always knew about your dad, or very early on. One was he was never shy of having an opinion. And secondly, he had a great sense of humor. So we'll start with the opinion first. Now, there was one element that I wasn't very fond of that I discovered when I was living with you or when we were visiting or whenever that was. But whether it was he felt obligated as a healthcare administrator to propagate the health message more fully, but it was to our dismay that every morning when we rolled out of bed, we had to have a warm or hot glass of water, which was very hard to swallow. I think you may remember. However, when it came to liquids, he also made up for that because, as Chris and my folks mentioned, squash. So my parents were very reluctant to provide us with soda pop of any kind, or whatever you call it, pop, soda pop, etc. And in fact, that was more rare than dessert. And when Dad Chris would take Lauren Jr., Chris, and I, and we would go play squash, he would provide us with orange crush, icy cold orange crush that was amazing. And the first time it happened, I said, well, I'm not so sure my parents would approve. And he assured me that he was a well-informed, capable adult and a hospital administrator and could discern if this was an appropriate time for soda or not. And it was. And Chris and I looked forward to that. Chris Jr. and I look forward to it every time. And he made sure we did. And it was wonderful. The humor came about really more pronounced when we were at Andrews together. And our two moms would spend a great deal of time forcing or abusing child labor laws and putting us all to work, essentially, particularly picking fruit in the fields. And the first time that we spent a long time in the strawberry and blueberry fields, our dads came back from their classes, and your dad kind of not complained, but noted to my dad that all our kids must have contracted the same virus because our hands and faces were strange shades of red and blue. And he thought that was hilarious. And it just demonstrated the wonderful sense of humor that he had, and which I look forward to sharing again in our heavenly kingdom.
Thank you, David. Very meaningful. How good it is for people to share little memories like that. Galen Heiss was one who worked very closely with Chris in the business department. Are you with us, Galen?
Hello to everybody who is on. It's lovely to be together in this special time to remember Chris. So I guess we connected with him at Avondale when we came in 81, and Lyle was the pastor of the college church. I would say the first pastor that was ever appointed. So I followed along with Lyle and met all these lovely people at Avondale. And later on, I studied business and came back and worked with Gail Valentine in the section, the business services section of the School of Business. I think that's what it was called then. So Chris was there, and the thing that I most remember about him is how humorous he was, how lighthearted he could be, and just any situation that was a bit difficult, Chris was able to be serious about it, but still find something humorous about the situation. I found that very much similar to the way I operate, as most of you would know. He was very kind, and he was a thoughtful person, and he was a lateral thinker, which was very good at times in meetings. I used to love some of the lateral things he came out with. Some may not have been quite practical in certain ways, but Chris, nevertheless, was, as others have said, was quite happy to voice his thought, and one could develop even further strategies from that lateral thought. I was a new teacher on the block. I taught piano for 25 years and then changed to this business teaching. and encouraged, might I say, by Gail. And I will always be grateful to her too. I know that Gail and Chris were very close, and I can remember the times that we would all talk together, and he so encouraged us there. I loved his enthusiasm. And when he called us all together to go to Nora Head, I was always happy. And I'm sure the others would be happy too. Oh, good, we've got another group time to go to Nora Head. And we had such a great time there with all the various colleagues. I found Chris very student-centered. And because of his student-centeredness, he was greatly loved by the students. They knew that he was out for them to succeed. And he was never hurried, pushing you away, or the door was always open. And I think that to me was an essence of someone who cared deeply for the progression of students. And I just think that there will be students who will comment later, but there are students all around the world who have been taught by Chris and who understand accounting, because he was able to say that credits are on that side and debits are on this side, which isn't exactly fully true. But for some who were in the class, they loved that bit of humour, that the credits were on the right and the debits were on the left. But they did understand accounting because of some of the formulas that he used. I taught accounting also, and he gave me some ideas on how to teach it within the business services course. So I just see Chris as someone who's left a legacy. And I think that you, Lorna, and Dean, Chris, Karen, and Jenny, you all can be really proud of your dad. And we honour him today. And he was such a wonderful Christian gentleman. And so I just thank you for the opportunity to speak and send you love and blessings. And as you continue to mourn for your dad, we will too, because we loved him like you did. Thank you.
Galen. That was lovely to hear from a colleague who worked so closely with Chris. I'm wondering if Norm Carlson is there. Norm was another teacher.
Chris was an outstanding accounting lecturer. His mentoring of business students resulted in significant numbers of graduates from the college holding responsible positions in both church and secular organisations. He had a good relationship with his students. Some of them joined together to form their own accounting business, and it showed the respect they had for Chris, for their old accounting lecturer, by persuading him to join them in their successful venture. He was an outstanding recruiter for the BBiz program. Many students came to college due to Chris's efforts. His efforts included travelling extensively to our schools on marketing trips, encouraged me to pursue my interest in economics, and arranged study leave for me to get the necessary qualification to lecture in the degree program. I'm grateful to him for his support. Chris was an enthusiastic staff picnic supporter. His organisation of potluck picnics grew to be significant social events. He was a valued colleague, a trusted friend, and a good mate.
Hey, thank you, Norm. That was a very good summary. And now, Mary, if you're there.
When I think of dear Chris Akroyd, I always think that he was a star that shone in the Trim's Milky Way of friendship. He came into our orbit for the first time in Christchurch in 1961, when he worked as Book and Bible House manager in the South New Zealand Conference. John came home to me very early in the week after he'd arrived to take up his work there, and he told me what an able young man was in charge of the Book and Bible House. He found him supportive, friendly, and he was going to be a mate to this newly appointed conference youth leader who was following after the dynamic Lou Lansdowne, rather a difficult act to follow because my husband had different administrative skills. So at the same time, we became friends with a teacher at the local church school, Miss Petrie. She was pretty, she was friendly, she was talented and a real Christian light in the school and the church. And apparently Chris had noticed this too, for it wasn't long until we were guests and participants in the marriage of Chris and Lorna. When we began work in India, John thought about Chris and Lorna, and they used to correspond, and he thought about how well their skills and dedication could contribute to the work in the Southern Asian division of the church. So he made some suggestions where it was applicable, and eventually they did sail away from New Zealand, not to India, as we had hoped, but to Pakistan, where they shone in their ministry. Years passed and our families grew and the friendship persisted. In England, when we were working there, John again thought of Chris and suggested that he and Lorna might join us there. A good accountant would be valued, and he suggested that. What did Chris think about that? But this time, Chris wrote back and said, no, not this time. Much as he and Lorna would love another adventure, they now realised that their children, especially Dean, needed the secure educational security of the structures they were already in. But he added, we promised to come and stay with you someday, though, he wrote. And they did, on their treasured trip to England when Chris discovered his English relatives. In 2007, John and I retired to New South Wales, where again we visited with the Akroyd family and became involved in the famous picnics at Nora Head and enjoyed with him what Chris always called Lorna cakes. By 2011, my husband needed nursing home care, and Chris came to me and said, look, Mary, Rathmines is too far away for you to be visiting every day like you do. Why don't you move to Kurrambong? I will help you all I can, and you will easily attend the E14 Sabbath School class. It's the best. I would never live away from Kurrambong because of that Sabbath School class. So I listened to Chris and I sold and I moved, staying with Lorna and Chris for a few days until my new home in Myers Crescent was available. He often called into me to check, see how I was getting on, or would wave when he and Norm went passing by on their walks. He became my attorney or John's attorney and advisor, and I always noticed how thoroughly he prepared for the Sabbath school lessons each week. You know, I can still picture him sitting where they regularly sat and hear him contributing. When Chris and Lorna celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, John and I were invited, and Norm Young, faithful daily walker with Chris, kindly transported John to be present. It was the last social visit that Chris and John shared together, and now they're both resting until that glorious day of resurrection with its promise of new bodies, refreshed minds, and eternal life. And as today we celebrate the life of our brother Chris, I can't help thinking of Daniel 12. It kept coming into my mind during the week when I knew that he was resting. And Daniel says, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. I will never forget Chris Akroyd, and my great sympathy to all the family today. It's not easy to be a widow, Lorna, but you'll get through. You will. You will.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. So many of these personal insights and testimonies just bring encouragement and new life to the family. Now, somebody has sent me a message, a niece of Chris's, a Kiwi mum.
I'm Cherie. Technically, Uncle Chris was my uncle, but many of you that are close to the family know that they actually had an extra daughter. Kieran and Jenny know that I'm their extra sister. Prue, Uncle Chris's sister, was my mum. I had the distinct pleasure of spending a lot of time with Auntie Lorna and Uncle Chris when I went to Avondale. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to speak without crying, so I'm sucking it up and I'm doing this thing. He was super special to me. Uncle Chris and I were so much alike that so often we would forget that we weren't actually blood relatives. Kieran and Jenny are laughing there. I can see them laughing because we would talk about it and we'd say, oh, it's got to be the Akroyd, and then realize, oh, actually, he wasn't originally an Akroyd. Him and I used to have many, I will term them discussions, sparring sometimes. Him and I love to have a good discussion on a many and varied topic, just like Norm and Chris did. He was a person who had such incredible wisdom. He was a person who didn't suffer fools. And if anyone knows me, they know that I don't either. He was just somebody who has and will continue to have a very, very special place in my heart, along with the rest of his family. Like I said, you know, I've been blessed. I have 2 sets of parents. So Auntie Lorna, I'm there with you right now. I'm embarking with my family. I'm sitting here in California right now, but I'm going to be embarking on a pretty significant journey with my family over the next week or two. And I've thought often in the last couple of weeks of the journeys that Uncle Chris took his family on, the Pakistan, the America, the back. And as I prepare to move my family on my 8th international move, I've thought a lot about what he did. And those moments I've sat and thought, am I crazy? Thinking, yep, Uncle Chris was just as crazy. And look what a difference he made in the world. Him and I used to tease a lot as well. I used to tease him every morning when I was staying there about his accountant's breakfast, because he would get out the scales and he would weigh his oatmeal and he would weigh his blueberries and he would count them out one by one. And it was this joke between him and I that every morning he ate an accountant's breakfast. There were many other jokes between him and I, but that was one of our fun ones, I think. Uncle Chris was also an organizer. Guys that know him know that well. He liked to use his wisdom. He used to organize for people, and his organization led to me being married. Bit of a long and complex story, which I'm not going to share now, but it is as a result of his organization that I now have a family that I'm about to move. My only sadness is that I'm stuck here in California right now and that I couldn't be physically with you family this morning as you laid them to rest. But I can guarantee that when I'm back on that soil, I will be making a visit to my dad.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. And brave, thanks for coming on. You know, the influence of a good teacher is never erased. And we're going to hear from some of Chris's students in just a few moments. But let me tell you a story. I was in our office in Strathfield, Sydney, and the receptionist phoned me and said, Alec, would you mind taking the call of a businessman? He wants to know something about Seventh-day Adventists. And I said, yeah, put him through. And when he came online, he said, look, I just need to know the basics of Adventists, what they can do and what they can't do. I said, well, what do you want to know for? He said, I've just employed an Avondale graduate. Oh, I said, okay. Why did you choose an Avondale graduate? Well, amongst us business people, they are just the best. There's quality. They have character, but they are excellent at their work. They've been well taught. I was surprised. So I walked them through what an Adventist could do and what they couldn't do, that they have choices, and he may choose to drink tea, he may not, because half of them don't. He may choose to eat meat, he may not, because it's a choice. But when it came to alcohol, most likely not. And this man was very, very grateful. But I was just interested in the insight that he had and gave me as one who had been at Avondale in the marketing area and as Dean of Students. He was giving me a picture from outside. The first ex-student we have is Todd Saunders. Todd, thank you so much for being patient and being willing to share with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I first met Chris in 1984, sitting next to me on my bed at Longbourn College of all places and pitching the merits of Avondale, to which I was disinclined at the time and told him I was going to Canterbury University, which he supported me on. 2 years later, he was continuing to ask the question, and eventually I went to Avondale at his insistence. And I remember the first speech at Avondale is that accounting is a hard taskmaster and 50% of you won't be here after the first semester. And I resolved not to be in that 50% with Chris and got through that first year and really enjoyed his contribution as a lecturer. And as those students that will follow me in talking know, the two premier subjects at Avondale in the Bachelor of Business was 201 Cost and Management Accounting and 310 Corporate Finance, and they were Chris's subjects. And Chris had this incredible passion for these subjects and this formidable intellect, this understanding of the theory, but he also loved detailed calculations and real life examples. Chris was prepared to engage with you on one basis and one basis only, and that was that you'd done the work and that you're prepared to have a conversation on the back of that. He expected your best, and therefore he got your best. And I reflect very, very much on that he certainly expected the best of you. If not, he'd send you back to do that work before he engaged with you again. And he was genuinely interested in the quality of the graduates that came out of the product that was being generated, and incredibly proud of each one of those graduates. And as he should be, when I look at the list of CEOs, finance directors, and the people following me and speaking today, he should be very proud. He would often joke about protecting his sustentation with the graduates that were coming out, but I know he took a personal interest in each one of us, and for me personally, I'm very glad about that. In later life, I worked with Chris very closely. We served on a lot of committees together and worked closely together. And I reflect still on, even at a later age, the sharpness of his thinking and the quality of the investment papers, always written in Chris's distinctive script, which his family would recognise. The love of the vigorous debate. Oh boy, I'd love a vigorous debate with Chris. And he would always play the ball and not the man, but there wasn't much left of the ball by the time we'd finished, and it was great to be part of. I taught him how to use Excel, which is evidence in itself that I will never be a teacher. He got to a basic level, I would argue, but not much past that. And but on a personal note, his friendship, his interest in me, my family, it was something that I truly valued. I will miss his love of rugby. Others have mentioned that, but most of all, I'll miss his smile and I'll miss his laugh. He loved the joke, he loved the laugh, as others have said, and incredible man. And I appreciate the influence on his life. So thank you, Alex, for the ability to contribute today.
Thanks, Todd. When you graduated, you've owned your own business. What are you doing these days?
I'm General Manager for Australia New Zealand at Sanitarium. I'm looking after Chris's sustentation. So I'm finally responding to the calling which he gave me, Alex.
Good on you. Thank you very much. And across in New Zealand, we have Stephen Davies.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And my first memory of Chris was during the registration days at Avondale College in 1984. He made me feel very welcome. He was an encourager and he was fun. And that is just exactly what I needed during those first days of college life. Chris was friends with my parents, David and Jenny Davies. My mum was from Brisbane, and because of Chris, who was the head of the business school, of course. And I was less inclined to leave home and friends, but they assured me that Avondale would be life-changing. And Chris was certainly a significant part of that. Chris was, he always took an active interest in me and the other students. And I remember him asking me and my roommate, Derek, he said, so what stocks or commodities have you been trading? And how much have you boys lost this week? And we always had a good laugh about it. And, or maybe he was laughing at us, which of course would have been perfectly understandable. But what I admired about Chris was that he made the study of business interesting, and his classes were not to be missed. I have to admit I didn't attend too many other classes, but I did always want to be at Chris's classes because he told real life stories. He made it applicable rather than just that boring old accounting theory. And he inspired us to succeed and to make a difference in the world. So thank you, Chris. I believe that you really inspired me just to be a little bit more organized, to focus on the things that really matter, and to engage positively and generously with everybody. And we look forward to seeing you again in that wonderful earth made new.
Thank you, Stephen. And thanks, Leanne, for being there. Are those pungers in the background?
I believe so, yes.
Lovely.
Kiwi background.
A little bit of New Zealand. Now, tell us what you do these days, Stephen. You've been all kinds of things. You've been a minister, but most of the time you've been a businessman. What are you doing these days?
Yes, I've been involved in business most of my life in IT and recently in self-storage, in early childhood education and various other things like that.
Lovely. Thank you for your contribution, and thank you for your testimony about Chris. Good teachers inspire hope, they ignite the imagination, and then they instill, I think, a love of learning. Chris Martin, you were a student at Avondale under Chris's tutelage. Share with us your story, your insights.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, first of all, I'd like to start off by extending my deepest sympathy to Lorna and Chris's family. I lost my mum to Alzheimer's late last year, so I can empathise with you and how you're feeling. I attended Avondale between 1981 and 1983 for 3 years to do the business course. While I was there, they were transitioning from a diploma course to a degree course, and I think the first graduates with the degree came out the year after I graduated in 1983. Chris Akroyd was one of my business lecturers, and so I first met Chris about 40 years ago. In fact, Chris was my favourite business lecturer. There's a number of reasons for that. One was that he didn't read to us from the textbook for 2 hours after lunch, which I recall one of our lecturers enjoying doing. He knew his stuff. As others have commented, he absolutely knew what he was on about, and he was very practical and dynamic in the way that he presented his classes, and that I really appreciated. Plus, on top of all that, counting can be rather boring, but Chris had an awesome sense of humour, and that came out over the top and made it enjoyable. If you had a question or a problem that you were wrestling with in regard to your accounting studies and you went to see Chris about it, he wouldn't just fob you off and tell you to go away and work it out yourself, or even just tell you the answer. Chris would always ask you a leading question, a question that would make you stop and go, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And then you'd go away, and oftentimes you were able to work through the problem because of the way he led you with questions. One of the things I do remember about our classes there was that Chris taught us about mortgages, interest rates, amortization, etc. And he ran us through numbers of different scenarios as we were learning those things. And it was all based on the fact that he was about to build a house, he was applying for mortgages, and we worked through how he would plan his mortgage, what sort of mortgage he wanted, how long he wanted it to be, how he was going to pay it off, all that sort of stuff. And we did that in class. That was a very, very practical example of how we could apply those sorts of skills. As I said, I graduated in 1983, and as Todd pointed out, Chris would tell you that, hey, not everyone that started off here is going to finish. And I started in the class in 1981, probably somewhere between 25, 26 and 30. My roommate was doing the course. He cleared out at the end of 6 months, and I got a new roommate who started accounting, and then he pulled out and did another course, and I graduated with, I think, 2 others who started with me at the end of those 3 years. So yes, Chris was right, had a high attrition rate. At the end of 83, I graduated, went back to New Zealand to work for Sanitarium. So I lost touch with Chris. That was a sad thing, but we were able to renew that friendship when I moved back to Kurrumbong in 1994. And Chris was living up the hill, and we built a house just down the hill here. I always loved it when we were out gardening out the front of our house, and Chris and Norm would come walking past, striding it out, briskly walking along, but they would always stop. And I guess it was part of that friendship. They would stop and chat, and Chris would ask how things were going, what we're doing. They'd give us all sorts of cheek and banter about what we were doing there in the garden and about accounting and that sort of stuff. There was always jibes from Chris about dumping accounting and going to computing. See, when I left college in 1983, I went back to Sanitarium to do accounting. I did that for about 10 years, and for the last 30 years, I've been in the computing field for Sanitarium. So it wasn't because of Chris's bad teaching. It was good teaching. He was really good at teaching accounting, but I just enjoyed computing more. So it's not Chris's fault I left accounting. I loved Chris's quick wit and his cheeky laugh. A number of others have commented about that, and that he always had a smile on his face. I will remember Chris as a mentor and a friend. We will miss him, but we'll see him in the morning when Jesus comes. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That was lovely. And Paul Geelan, you were there, and immediately after, there's a lady, I think, was it from New Zealand, somewhere? Charlene Williams. We'll put you in there. Thank you. Paul Geelan.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, thank you for the honour of just saying a few words about the great man. And I really come to the task from a couple of perspectives. One's from growing up in Kurrumbong, all my formative years from essentially the age of 1 to 21 were in Kurrumbong. So I was able to get to know the family more broadly as well. The Kurrumbong of the 1980s was significantly smaller than it is now, and somewhat more insular. And I could really ride my bike around Kurrumbong in those days and know pretty much who lived in every single house. And so, you know, I knew where the Akroyds lived, and I knew the occupants of that house, both from, you know, interaction and school experience and so on. And I guess there were 3 things that I understood even at that very early age. One was that this family laughed a lot. Another was that they were very intelligent. And another was that they lived their life with passion for family and for faith. And I guess any interaction that I've had with them over the last 30 years since then hasn't changed my perspective on that. They still laugh a lot. They still are manifesting their incredible intelligence in many areas, and they still are very passionate about family and faith. In terms of Chris, I was a student at his feet, and I guess my memories of favourite subjects were probably a little different to Todd's. Out of the 30 subjects I studied over 3 years, there were 2 that stood out for me. One was tax law and practice, 1 and 2. They weren't taught by Chris, but they were taught by a crazy visiting lecturer from Newcastle Uni who told us stories about ATO auditors who would come in with machine guns if we got the legislation wrong. That was memorable. But Chris particularly taught one subject called investment analysis, which he was really, really passionate about and shared that passion with us as students. And I particularly liked that because it lifted us from the boredom of the monthly and the annual cycle of accounting and actually gave us something that was significantly more exciting than that. And he taught it with passion because it was a real passion of his. His teaching, I guess, yeah, look, it's fair to say that I probably spent some time napping in most courses, except Chris's. Chris's would, with his passion, with his humour, with his humility, with his humanity, he really did keep you engaged, you know, regardless of how dry the particular topic might be. Look, I think his contribution to denominational, leadership, to corporate leadership, to community leadership has been immense. He took some very green and naive teenagers that probably in reality only signed up to business because they thought that's where the money was, and really challenged them to understand their higher purpose and their higher calling. Yeah, it was. He did take a personal interest, as many as have reflected, and yeah, look, I'll be eternally personally grateful. I don't know many colleagues and friends that are now in leadership roles, as you've already heard testified, feel exactly the same way. So thank you for the privilege of speaking. And I just want to express my personal condolences to the family and just endorse the incredible affirmation that's been given in the many other statements. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for that. If any of you get the Reader's Digest, they're places where there are jokes, there are stories, there are times of laughter. Well, I've had a message come from Charlene Williams. She says, I've got a funny story. Now, this hasn't been edited, so I'm not sure what it is, but Charlene, share with us, and then Paul Rebessa.
Well, it's actually Ron Williams. I'm logged in my wife's computer. My first memory with Chris was the same as Todd's, sitting in class. And first day we were told 50% of you aren't going to pass this subject. I'm going, whoa. He said, look at the person next to you. It's either going to be you or him who fail. And I looked to my left and there's a long-haired looking blonde guy. I thought, oh, I reckon I've got him covered. I should be right. Anyway, introduced myself after the class to the kid sitting next to me. He says his name was Chris Akroyd. He's the lecturer's son. I thought, oh, I'm stuffed. I've got no chance of passing. So as it turned out, both Chris and I failed the subject. But Chris became one of my best friends. He was best man at my wedding. I was best man at his wedding afterwards. After all that, 30 years after, I actually finished my business degree and got my degree now. So, but Chris had a lot to do with encouraging me to keep going. So thanks.
Yeah, congratulations. That's a good story. Paul Rebessa, thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm one of those people who, I guess, met Chris as a lecturer, but then had the opportunity later on in life to really get to know him as a colleague, as a neighbour. We lived next door to each other for a number of years and then down the street from each other. But mostly as a friend is how I would categorise our relationship now. Look, as a lecturer and head of our business faculty, the thing I remember about Chris was that everything he said was clear, absolutely crystal clear. And he shared his knowledge really generously with those who are interested in it. And I guess my favourite memory of sitting in class with Chris was those students who were braver than I was and willing to disagree with him. And I sort of enjoyed sitting back and watching Chris just systematically and comprehensively disable their argument. And I didn't keep a score on it, but if there were 100 debates, I'd score Chris at 100 and the students at 0. I later worked with Chris at Avondale College, and what I found when I worked with him was that he was just ever so supportive. Even when we couldn't agree, I was in admin and Chris was in the business faculty. Sometimes we couldn't agree on things, but the thing I love about him is that when Chris is in your corner, he's firmly in your corner. He's loyal, committed, willing. And I think having Chris in your corner, it's a little bit like having a superpower because it only ever ends in your favour. When I think about Chris as a neighbour, I'd call him energetic. I'd call him a little bit habitual because it seemed like clockwork that he would be out walking the family's beautiful black Labrador, Diablo. I sort of think my timing might be a bit out here, but I reckon when Diablo passed, it was Lorna who was recruited to the walking duties. And my memory is Chris walking diagonals up and down the street so that Lorna wouldn't get left behind with what I'll describe as his unbearable walking pace. And as we've heard many times today, certainly Norm and Chris became walking buddies and certainly talked each other's legs off. But I think my most cherished chapter with Chris is what I'll call the carpool years. Chris and I, together with Rose Housen and Kathy Kingston and Melville Simmons, we all lived behind the shops there in Corumbong. And when we were all working in Wahroonga, we drove down there and back together in the same car most days. And you get to know someone when you live in that small little environment for 2 hours a day. And Chris had the front seat. It was reserved for Chris. There's no way any of us would dare take it. And then every morning as we pulled out of Corumbong, we'd stop at the news agency and a lady there would be expectantly waiting for him to exchange his money for a copy of the Financial Review. And all the way to Sydney, he would read that. And when something particularly took his interest, he'd quote it out to the rest of us. And I think Rose, Kathy, Melville and I learned quite a bit, and we stayed informed from Chris during those years. But I think it was the homeward journey that was the most fun, because there was nearly not a day that went by when there wasn't a story about the family's time in Pakistan. And we heard some of those stories just over and over again. I'll say for the benefit of new carpool members, but I think just sometimes Chris kept using the same story. But each time he told it, there was a new level of enthusiasm, a new level of drama, a new level of laughter. And Chris enjoyed laughing at his own stories. And the more he enjoyed it, the more we all enjoyed it as well. And when he wasn't telling stories, I will say he was the world's best ambassador for Toyota Camrys. Each time it was his turn to drive, and that's when I thought he was legitimately due the front seat. But he would verbally ponder the comfort, the power, the reliability of his trusty Camry. And he'd marvel how many trouble-free kilometres it had travelled. And I look back on that and I say, geez, that ended up working because I ended up buying one and only just sold it last year, and we've got another one to replace it with. And then every Friday he'd remind us what a great husband he was, because he would go home and well, he'd announce. It was important that he announced that he was going home to do the vacuuming. But if I was going to sum up Chris, it seems to me that he took to heart the counsel of Solomon when he wrote in Ecclesiastes, whatever your hand finds to do it with all of your might. Because to me, Chris was a bundle of energy, a bundle of wisdom, and a bundle of passion, all sort of mixed up together. And whatever he did it with all of his might. And that's a wonderful way to live your life. And it's a wonderful legacy that Chris has left with all of us, and we will really miss him. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. You graduated. What are you doing these days?
Working for the South Pacific Division, investment and financial services manager. So Chris had a big impact on that. And a little bit like Todd, I've now got all of the sustentation assets within our portfolio and looking after them. So perhaps paying my dues that I owe to Chris as well.
Well, just remember what Chris said to Todd. Okay, thank you. Grant von Dongen, where did you learn from Chris?
Well, I'll start with the story. So I started with Avondale in '85 as a young fella who lacked a fair bit of confidence and had no real direction. So I'll add to what everyone else has said. I just want to say as a footnote, Todd and Paul, God, you guys are looking really old. So I'm just adding to Chris's humour there. So I'll add to what everyone said is look at the guy or the person next to you. They're not going to be there in 12 months at the end of the year. But what I think on my class and his introduction, he said, and also you computing students, I'm going to fail you purposely because all you do is you go back to your dorm room and you play computer games. Unfortunately, in '85, I was a computing student and an avid gamer, and I was shacked up with a good mate of mine who was also an avid gamer. So I didn't pass many subjects that first semester, but the one I did was the accounting course because I was so enamored with it. I mean, Chris taught me the joy of numbers dancing through the T accounts, and I still feel that even today. Even though I don't work in accounting, I do an accounting related profession. I still get quite a bit of excitement when people talk about accounting fundamentals. Chris was really, really approachable. I'd go and talk to him quite a lot. He could see, I left in my second semester. I was one of those that dropped out. I actually went back to work with a broking firm to save up enough money to do the business degree, which I had to pay for myself. It's quite horrendous, but it was well worthwhile. I then came back and started the business degree and worked really, really hard at it. In fact, I didn't fail any more subjects. I was quite motivated. Chris was a great lecturer. I found he had a lot of experience. He was very approachable. And I don't want to talk too long, but look, even after I graduated, I still had a relationship with the Akroyd family and the Mowbray family. And as a non-Adventist, they accepted me into their home exceptionally well and treated me as one of them. It was great. So I really, really enjoyed my time with Avondale and with Chris. And a big call out to Dr. Carlson. You won in the end, mate. I'm working in IT with finance systems. So
lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. Grant Richardson.
Actually, Jenny's going to read it, and then when I'm done, Karen's got another one to read.
Okay.
Okay. So Grant Richardson's currently the Chaired Professor of Accounting at Macquarie University. He writes, Chris was my tutor for corporate finance at the University of Newcastle over 30 years ago. How time flies. I still vividly remember how enthusiastic Chris was as my teacher. We got along together really well, and I regard him very highly as one of my earliest academic mentors. Chris inspired me to leave Newcastle and carry out my PhD at Monash University in Melbourne. It was one of the best decisions of my life that opened so many doors for me. So that's from Grant Richardson.
Okay, I'm doing a talk from Jody. Mr. Akroyd was one of my lecturers at Avondale and the head of the business faculty when I started my study. This is from Jody Burgoyne, who was Jody also. As students, we quickly learned that Mr. Akroyd's class, in Mr. Akroyd's class, you must be prepared. He would always ask questions of individual students by name. If you didn't know the answer or couldn't work it out quickly enough, it would be embarrassing. We would sit low in our seats, praying that the lesson would run. We would sit low in our seats, praying that the lesson would run out before he called our name, or that if he didn't ask a question, that it was, or that he did ask us a question that was one that we had prepared for. I remember what would become our routine. Mr. Akroyd would ask me a question. I would confidently answer the question. He would walk slowly to the window, chuckling. At the window, he would pause for a moment, rub the bridge of his nose under his glasses, and then turn and face me and say, yes, but there was a much simpler, more conventional way to get there, Jody. Needless to say, we all learned a lot in his classes. I also remember that we had to meet with the head of business at the beginning of the year and sometimes each semester to plan our subjects, checking timetables and talk how our study was progressing. I smile as I remember how he would shake his head at my elective choices and he would try and persuade me that programming and algorithms were a better choice. Then on my graduation day, Chris, because we had progressed to first name by then, came to congratulate me with a hug. Chris has helped to create a generation of successful people, finance professionals, and he will remain in our memories until we meet again.
Thank you so much. That was good. Excellent. Lyle Heiss, you've listened to all that's happened. You've been a friend of the family and a friend of Chris. As you look back, what's a summary to all the tributes and testimonies that have been given today? Thanks, Lyle.
Yes, thanks, Alex. My reflection really has to do with what it means to be a pastor in a big, complex church with a family of people like the Akroyds as members. We both came to Avondale in 1981, and our family had just come from Fiji and from some significant sickness, but we were rehabilitating and starting life as the first pastoral family at Avondale College Church. Up until then, it had been pastored informally by theology lecturers. And the Akroyds turned up at the same time. And as I've been listening to colleagues and students, I've had my pastor's hat on, thinking about what an amazing thing it was to be a pastor in this big church, 1,500 members, and to have a colleague and a family like this who were just so supportive. Chris would forever be encouraging me, and I would hear him, unbeknownst to him at times, offering a celebration to those around about College Church, affirmations of my ministry that he didn't even know I was hearing or knowing about. I felt like I became a member of the Akroyd family. Chris and Lorna were so hospitable, and you guys will remember, but I think I got to study the Bible with all three of you, and I've certainly got a memory of baptizing some of you. And it was a beaut thing to go to the Akroyd house and have Chris and Lorna so affirming of what it meant to have a pastor as a friend and a pastor who nurtured their kids. I've got another memory. We ran a family life special worship service, and I remember saying to Chris and Lorna, are you willing to have a conversation with me up the front about what it's meant to you for your fourth little boy to join the family and what it took to provide for him the special things that he needed? And they were more than willing to do this. And I can remember to this day that you could have heard a pin drop in that big church, listening to parents explaining what it meant for their family to be blessed by someone like Dean and what it took to make his life really worthwhile. I thought it was really courageous and massively affirming, and the sort of thing that it's taken 40 years for the country at large to figure out about ministering to people with special needs. Chris was enormously supportive right to the day. I did 2 goes at being pastor of College Church, and Chris was my big cheerleader on both occasions. And I was really sad when the disease finally took him away, and we couldn't have the kind of conversations that we used to love having. I remember how Chris was willing, he trusted me as a pastor to open to me and me to him the deepest places of our lives together, and sharing the kind of challenges that we'd faced and the way in which faith brought us encouragement and peace even through really difficult times. So rest well, Chris Akroyd. You are a champion, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in a better place.
Thanks, Lyle. Wonderful. I really appreciate everything that people have said and done today, and I know the family will appreciate that. We're going to close now with a few words of comfort from Dr. Kevin Petrie, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University, and he is also going to close in prayer. That will be followed by a musical piece, Be Still My Soul. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Alex. I've just so much enjoyed listening to the stories and the reflections. Like Uncle Chris and his family, our family spent many years living in different countries, and as mentioned before, at the time Chris and Lorna and family were in Pakistan, we were in East Africa, and we would exchange between the families letters and audio tapes on the old reel-to-reel audio. And I remember getting them from the Akroyds, and one particular one, Uncle Chris would tell a story, and then each of my cousins would talk, all of us in our typical mixed accents from the various countries we had lived in. And there was something special about that package arriving and feeling that sense of connection with family, even though we were far apart. And then, of course, there was the time we returned permanently to the homeland. And as the plane touched down, there would be family waiting, and that exhilaration of simply just being all together again, permanently, or so it felt. And yet, as the years have passed, one by one, family members have passed off the scene, with each one leading us to wonder how home could ever truly be home without them in it. And with it, a growing dissatisfaction that even the best this life can offer is never enough, and a growing determination to not think of this world as being my true home. Like you, I'm just passing through. I have reread over the years a number of times those words of C.S. Lewis, written in his book, Mere Christianity. And he writes, "Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exist. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it be snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life, to press on to that other country and to help others to do the same." I'm forever grateful, and I know many of you will remember this passage, that as a kid, my parents had us to memorize. "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there ye may be also." I love how the Message writes, "I'm on my way to get a room ready for you. And if I'm on my way to get a room ready for you, I'll come back and get you so that you can come and live where I am." So to Aunt Lorna, my cousins, Jenny, Chris, Kieran, Dean, and to all the family and friends gathered, there is a better day coming, and the reunion will be such that we have never dreamed of. You with your father, me with mine, and together we will have a time such as we can only dream of, but that time is coming soon. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Father God, we pause and acknowledge your goodness to us, your love for each of us individually. And we give you thanks for the life of Chris Akroyd, knowing that all that he has done through you will continue to live on through the words and actions and lives of those who are left behind. We look forward to a day where there will be an incredible reunion, and we commit to being there and ask that for each of us you will give a special measure of your Spirit as we move on, and particularly for family as they learn to live without Chris there, that you will be their peace and you will be their strength. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Be still my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. Lord.